The first thing I remember is the smell. That strange, antiseptic perfume every hospital wears like stubborn jewelry. I was propped up in the recovery bed, sweat cooling on my skin, trying to make sense of the impossible weight. Joy, exhaustion, fear settling over my chest. My son, River, was swaddled against me, making tiny hiccup sounds, the room's fluorescent hum folding around us like a fragile cocoon. In that fragile hush, the door swung open and a nurse I hadn't met yet glided in, an expectant smile already lifting her cheeks. She held a small plastic bracelet between two gloved fingers. Its white band caught the overhead light, and for a second I assumed it was another tag for River, maybe something to track his immunizations. But the nurse's eyes weren't on me. They were flicking past the foot of my bed, toward the stiff silhouette of Judith Wren, my boyfriend's mother, who stood planted near the window as if comfort and closeness were contagious diseases. Judith had been here less than 4 minutes and had spoken exactly 3 words to me. "He's very small," she'd said it with the strained politeness of someone remarking on the weather at a funeral. The nurse stopped beside Judith, her voice syrupy with courtesy. "I have a special visitor bracelet for you." She slipped the band onto Judith's wrist with the same ceremonial flourish someone might use to coronate royalty. Judith looked down, expression unreadable, but I saw her knuckles tighten like she'd grabbed an electric fence. The glossy black text on the bracelet read, "Guest of the CEO." For half a heartbeat I almost laughed, and then the absurd power of the moment hit me like warm water after a long run. I was the CEO. My brand new marketing agency, Monroe Strategies, had required that hospital notation, only because I'd insisted on listing my occupation precisely. No generic consultant, no humble self-employed. At 3 a.m, while breathing through contractions, I had signed the admission form with the same steady confidence I sign every client contract. Occupation, Chief Executive Officer. Judith's gaze flicked toward me. If she expected me to apologize for the label, she was bound for disappointment. She tried to tuck the bracelet beneath the cuff of her pearl gray blazer, but the band snapped back into view with each subtle twitch of her wrist. It gleamed like a neon sign screaming the truth she'd spent 9 months denying. I was in charge here. I was family, even if she had tried to write me out of the story. I searched her face for any crack. Anger, shame, even reluctant respect. Nothing. Just that cool, starched calm she used as armor. In the hallway behind her, Elias paced, shoulders hunched, phone pressed to his ear. His nervous energy filled the space Judith refused to breathe in. He had called her the minute my contractions started, and she'd flown across 2 states overnight, apparently determined to stake her claim to the grandchild she had said she might never acknowledge. The bracelet, though, broke the script. No longer was she the matriarch granting or withholding approval. She was a visitor granted entry by the woman she'd dismissed, because the hospital only recognized the role I wrote for myself. Guest of the CEO. The words pulsed with a delicious irony that tasted better than the ice chips I'd begged for hours earlier. The nurse finished adjusting Judith's band and gave a little nod to me, perhaps sensing the tension rippling beneath our polite silence. "Everything looks great, Mom," she said to me. She didn't acknowledge Judith again, didn't ask if Grandma wanted a photo, didn't offer her the recliner chair reserved for birth partners. In that small choreography, institutional policy echoed my boundaries louder than any confrontation. Judith cleared her throat, one sharp, papery sound. "May I hold him?" she asked, voice soft like she was afraid the walls might repeat her request. I paused long enough for the clock to tick twice, the weight of choice warm in my palms. My son, blissfully unaware, squeaked and rubbed his cheek against my gown. "Not just yet," I said, keeping my tone gentle but immovable. "He's still regulating his heartbeat on my chest." The nurse nodded, backing me up with practiced authority. Judith's shoulders stiffened. She stepped to the window, pretending to examine the city skyline beyond the smudged glass. But I saw her studying the bracelet's label, reflected faintly in the pane. In that moment, a truth crystallized inside me like frost on a window. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a tidy line of text on a wristband, a decision scribbled on a hospital form while the world counts contractions. Power can whisper, and its whisper can rearrange a room. Judith was no longer the gatekeeper. I was the CEO of my life, my agency, my motherhood, and anyone entering that orbit did so as my guest. River stirred and opened one eye, pupils dark and unfocused, yet somehow reading the room. I kissed his forehead and felt my pulse slow to match his, calm and sure. Judith could call me a visitor in her narrative, but the bracelet told the only story that mattered now. Guest of the CEO. And the CEO was busy, gently rocking the future in her arms. Before all the chaos, before the bracelet, the hospital, the silence at the baby shower, my life was, honestly, good. Not perfect, not glamorous, but grounded in something real. I had my routines, my career, my people. I was 29, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, with a view of downtown from my balcony and a bookshelf that held more journals than novels. My life had structure, purpose, and most days, peace. My name is Talia Monroe. I run a small marketing firm called Monroe Strategies, a project that began as a freelance hustle and slowly grew into a real business. I had 3 loyal clients, a part-time assistant, and big plans. I'd always been driven, not for wealth, but for independence. My mother, Carla, taught me that. She raised me alone after my father dipped out before I could walk. Carla was a school counselor for 25 years, the kind of woman who kept a calm head during emergencies and packed extra sandwiches just in case someone forgot their lunch. We were tight. Not in a best friend way, more like a lighthouse and its ship. Steady, unspoken understanding. When I told her I was dating someone new, she didn't pry. Just said, "Watch how he handles silence. That'll tell you who he really is." His name was Elias Wren. We met at a tech conference in Dallas. He was tall, a little awkward, smart in a way that made you lean in when he talked. He worked in software development, coding back-end systems for a logistics startup. Our connection was slow and sweet, the kind that made you smile without realizing. On our 3rd date, he brought me a jar of my favorite brand of marinara sauce because I'd mentioned just once how I could never find it in Austin. He was thoughtful like that, attentive, kind. When he introduced me to his family over a long weekend in Savannah, Georgia, I wore a navy dress and curled my hair, hopeful and naive. I remember thinking, this could really be something. That was when I first met Judith Wren, Elias's mother. A tall woman with sharp features and immaculate clothes, the kind of woman who always looked ready for a magazine shoot in a kitchen she never cooked in. She greeted me with a handshake and a tight-lipped smile that said, "Welcome," while her eyes said, "Temporary." At first, I brushed it off. Some mothers are just cautious, protective. Elias assured me she was old school. His father had passed when he was 15, and Judith had never remarried. She raised Elias and his younger sister, Candace, on her own. That, he said, had made her a little intense. Over time, I learned that intense meant controlling. Judith curated every moment like a press release. Birthdays, holidays, even casual brunches had agendas. She spoke in polished, clipped sentences and gave compliments like hand-me-downs. When I laughed too loudly or wore something casual, her disapproval filled the room like perfume, subtle but impossible to ignore. Still, I tried. I wanted to belong. I showed up for Christmas. I brought wine to dinner. I sent thank-you notes. I laughed at stories I didn't find funny and swallowed my pride when she corrected me in front of Elias. I wanted her to see me as someone worthy of her son, someone who cared about him enough to navigate the icy waters of her approval. But Judith never warmed. She never asked about my work, never remembered my mother's name, never addressed me directly if she could help it. I was the guest at every gathering, never quite inside, always a little outside. Elias, to his credit, tried to play diplomat. He'd squeeze my hand under the table or whisper apologies in the car ride home. He loved me, and I believed him, but he also loved peace. And peace, in his mind, meant not rocking the boat, even if that boat was sailing in the wrong direction. I told myself it was just a matter of time, that Judith would come around once she saw how serious we were. When we moved in together, I imagined she'd finally accept me. When Elias got a raise and used it to help me pay for a bigger office, I thought maybe that gesture would win her over. But no matter how many holidays I attended, how many polite smiles I offered, or how many polite jabs I endured, the message was clear. I was tolerated, not accepted. Still, I clung to hope. I thought if we got married one day, or had a child, that would change things. That a baby would soften her, make her see me not as a threat, but as family. I didn't know then, not really, that some people don't see you as family, no matter what. Some people guard their sense of control so tightly that even love becomes a competition. And Judith Wren wasn't just guarding her son. She was guarding her vision of what a Wren family should look like. And I, with my natural hair and ambition and liberal career, didn't fit her mold. But I didn't see the full picture yet. I still believed I could win her over. That was my first mistake. The second would come later, when I thought being pregnant would finally make me belong. Looking back, the signs were there from the beginning. They weren't neon or loud. They were quiet, refined, almost graceful in how expertly they blended in. Judith Wren didn't scream or insult. No, she wielded control with a smile, like someone politely straightening a picture frame on a wall that wasn't crooked. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't one big thing. It was 100 tiny cuts. A dozen dinner conversations where my voice didn't matter. 1,000 polite omissions that whispered, "You are not one of us." When Elias and I first started dating seriously, I thought maybe Judith was just formal. She was a Southern woman with a deeply rooted sense of tradition. She liked structure, manners, predictable roles. I didn't drink sweet tea, I didn't go to church, and I didn't come from the kind of family that wore matching Christmas pajamas or scheduled weekly phone calls. I wasn't what she expected. I knew that. But I thought I could still be enough. I remember the first holiday I spent with the Wrens. It was Thanksgiving. Judith had this elaborate table set up with name cards, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, gold ribbon curled on the edges. My name card said Elias's guest, not Talia Monroe, just a title, like a reservation at a restaurant. I laughed about it on the ride home, but it lodged in my chest like a pebble in a shoe. It didn't stop there. Whenever I spoke about my job, Judith would smile and say things like, "That's such a cute little business," or, "It's good to have hobbies when you're young." Hobbies. As if the company I built from scratch was just a side project between mani-pedis. I once mentioned I had landed a contract with a regional nonprofit, and she replied, "Nonprofits don't pay much. Elias will take care of you anyway." She said it kindly, like a compliment, like a benediction, but I felt the sting beneath the sugar. Elias didn't always notice. He was raised in this rhythm, the subtle dance of decorum and deflection. In his world, tension was best smoothed over, not named. He'd tell me things like, "She didn't mean it that way," or, "It's just how she talks." He said it with such earnestness that I almost believed him, but actions don't lie. When we moved in together, Judith didn't say congratulations. She sent Elias a check, made out only in his name, for furniture. The card inside read, "Make sure everything feels like home." When I bought a desk for our home office, she asked Elias privately if it could be moved elsewhere, because women's clutter makes a space feel small. It wasn't just me. Elias's younger sister Candace had moved out to LA years ago and rarely came home. At first I thought she was just busy, but over time I learned she had her own set of scars. Judith didn't believe in therapy. She called it emotional indulgence. She didn't believe in women proposing business ideas without asking for male advice, and she certainly didn't believe in women disagreeing with her. Elias, the golden boy, was the one she invested in, hovered over, controlled. She still had access to his bank account. She scheduled his dentist appointments. She sent him articles about cholesterol when he ordered steak. At 31, he still called her every single night. Every single night. And I watched quietly as the strings wrapped tighter. The dysfunction was like a play, rehearsed and refined. Judith played the doting matriarch. Elias played the obedient son. And anyone who entered their orbit had one job: stay on script. But I was never great at playing roles. I asked questions, I set boundaries. I challenged Elias, not out of anger, but out of a deep desire for partnership. I didn't want a man who couldn't stand on his own. I wanted a teammate, not a middleman. But that didn't fit Judith's vision. In her eyes, a good partner supported from the sidelines. Seen, not heard. Gentle, not opinionated. Loyal, not independent. I was the wrong kind of woman for her perfect son. And slowly, subtly, the message became clearer. You don't belong here. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you simply are not what I would have chosen. I didn't know how deep it ran yet. I didn't know that pregnancy wouldn't bridge the gap, that it would rip it even wider. But the dysfunction had been there all along, dressed in pearls, smiling, polite, and deadly. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning. It was early spring in Austin, the kind of day when the light filters in like a promise. I'd been feeling off for a few days, a fluttering fatigue in my chest, and when I opened the bathroom drawer and saw a test I'd forgotten about, something inside me just said, try. The lines showed up fast, bold, clear, unapologetic. I sat on the edge of the tub, holding the test like it might change if I stared hard enough. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I wasn't scared. Not exactly. Just overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what this meant. I wasn't just Talia Monroe anymore. I was going to be someone's mother. I called Elias that afternoon. He was at work but answered on the second ring. I remember his voice, hopeful, like he thought I was calling to share a funny meme or ask about dinner. And then I told him in a quiet, shaking voice, I'm pregnant. Silence. A long one. Then, are you sure? He wasn't angry. He wasn't dismissive. Just stunned. To his credit, Elias showed up that night with takeout and questions. He wanted to know how I felt, what I wanted, if I was okay. His reaction was human. A little scared, a little wide-eyed, but ultimately supportive. He kissed my forehead and whispered, We'll figure it out. For a week, we existed in this fragile, beautiful bubble of planning. He pulled out spreadsheets. I bookmarked cribs. We didn't tell anyone right away. It was our secret, and in that moment, I think we both believed this would bring us closer. That love, when tested, expands. But then he told his mother. He wanted to do it in person, so he flew to Georgia for a quick weekend visit. I stayed behind, feeling nervous and hopeful. I told myself that Judith might surprise us, that a baby, her first grandchild, would soften her sharp edges, that she'd see me not as a disruption, but as the future of her family. That hope shattered the moment Elias walked back through the door. He didn't say anything right away. He just dropped his bag and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire trip. I sat across from him at the kitchen counter watching the tightness in his shoulders. She's not happy, he said finally. Not happy. Or furious. She's confused. She said this wasn't what she expected. I blinked. Expected? Elias, I'm pregnant, not getting a tattoo. She thinks it's too soon, he added. She thinks we haven't built a stable foundation. It felt like a slap. Judith didn't know what our foundation looked like. She never asked, never wanted to. And what else? I asked. Because I know that's not all she said. Elias hesitated. Then he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. It was a text from Judith, sent the night he told her. This changes nothing. You are not family. I will always love you, but this is not the future I prayed for. Don't expect me to play a part in this mistake. I stared at the message, my mouth dry. I knew she didn't like me. I knew she was distant, critical, guarded. But this was deliberate cruelty. This was a woman drawing a line in ink. Elias watched me, guilt swimming in his eyes. He tried to explain. She just needs time. She's adjusting. She's old-fashioned. I handed his phone back. She doesn't need time. She needs control. And she just lost it. That night I barely slept. My baby was the size of a blueberry, and already someone had decided he wasn't worthy of being celebrated. I thought about my own mom, Carla, who cried when I told her. Happy tears, full of pride and fierce loyalty. And then I thought about the fact that my child's own grandmother couldn't even say the word family without turning it into a weapon. Weeks passed. Judith never called, never texted. When Elias invited her to the gender reveal party, she said she was unavailable. When I sent her a personalized invitation to the baby shower, just to offer one more chance, it was returned to sender. Unopened. Not even a message. That baby shower, by the way? It was beautiful. Full of laughter, pink and green decorations, and warmth. But a small corner of the room stayed cold, because I knew the empty chair by the corner table was hers. And still, I held on to hope. Hope that once the baby was here, she'd feel differently. That holding him in her arms would melt whatever icy grudge she carried. I didn't know yet that she'd show up anyway. Not for me. Not for the baby. She came for power. What she got was something else entirely. After the baby shower, something in me cracked. It was supposed to be a day of joy, a celebration of life and motherhood. And in many ways, it was. My friends from work came, bringing silly games and thoughtful gifts. My cousin Jada flew in from Denver, surprising me with a hand-sewn baby quilt. My mom, Carla, beamed as she served cupcakes shaped like rattles, her face a mixture of pride and protection. The room was full of people who chose to love me. But despite all the laughter and love, there was a shadow in the corner. An empty seat with a name card on it. Judith Wren. I had placed it there because a part of me, the hopeful part that hadn't fully burned out, still believed she might walk through the door. She didn't. And I think that was the moment I truly felt the weight of what she'd been doing all along. It wasn't about forgetting my name or ignoring my work or making sly comments at dinner. It was about erasing me from the narrative. About denying the one role she couldn't stand for me to have. Mother of her grandchild. That night, after the last gift had been opened and the last dish put away, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by pastel balloons and torn wrapping paper, and sobbed. Not the kind of cry that ends with a laugh and tissues, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, old, wounded. I wasn't crying just because of her. I was crying because I realized how alone I'd felt in this pregnancy. Elias was present physically. He came to appointments. He held my hand when we heard the heartbeat. But emotionally, he was still that little boy dialing his mother every night. Still stuck between what he owed her and what he promised me. And he didn't see it. Or didn't want to. He thought not taking sides was the same as being fair. He thought neutrality was love. But neutrality in the face of cruelty is just permission. I tried talking to him about it a few days after the shower. I told him clearly, I need you to choose us. Me. Your son. I need to know that we come first now. He looked at me, eyes tired, and said, You're asking me to abandon my mom. I shook my head. Number, I'm asking you to protect your family from someone who refuses to acknowledge we even are one. He didn't have a response to that. Just silence. That silence became the soundtrack of our days. At night, he'd sit on the edge of the bed, texting her updates. When I asked what he was saying, he'd mumble, Just that you're healthy, that the baby's okay. I started to wonder who he was really building this life with, me, or the idea of his mother's approval. And then came the whispers, the doubts that creep in when you're tired, pregnant, and emotionally starved. What if I'm too difficult? What if she's right about me? What if I'm just not enough? I started avoiding mirrors. I skipped meetings. I stopped updating my marketing blog. I felt myself shrinking, like I was folding myself smaller and smaller to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Even my relationship with my body began to shift. I wasn't glowing. I was surviving. Some mornings I'd press my hand to my belly and say softly, I'm sorry you have to feel this. My son hadn't even been born yet, and I already felt like I was failing him by letting this toxicity linger so close to our lives. Carla noticed. One afternoon, she showed up uninvited with 2 bags of groceries and a softness in her voice I hadn't heard since I was a child. "You're doing everything right," she told me as she stirred soup on the stove. "But you don't need to earn someone's love while carrying life inside you." She reached across the kitchen island, took my hand and said, "Talia, family doesn't get to audition you. They either accept the role you play in their lives, or they forfeit the chance." That was the first time I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of anger. Not the kind that burns hot and fast, but the kind that smolders and transforms. Judith had declared war on my existence in her family. Elias was caught in a fog, and I was left holding the weight of it all, trying to create life in a space that felt emotionally starved. But something had to change. I was done crying in the dark, because motherhood wasn't supposed to start with shame and silence, and I refused to let my son inherit either. After weeks of silent battles and emotional exhaustion, I hit a wall. Not a dramatic collapse, not a screaming match or door slammed in someone's face. It was quieter than that, more internal. I woke up one morning staring at the ceiling, the late light of spring drifting across my bedroom, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt like myself. The version of me who used to lead meetings with confidence, pitch clients without flinching, and walk into rooms knowing I belonged, she felt like a faded photograph. In her place was a woman who apologized before asking for water, who counted how many times she smiled during a conversation, just to seem gracious, who tracked Judith's emotional weather like a forecast, constantly adjusting her plans for the next storm. And I was exhausted, not just from the pregnancy, but from being so small, so careful, so deeply afraid of being the villain in someone else's story. That morning, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, intending to check work emails. Instead, I opened a blank Google Doc and wrote, at the top, in bold, "What do I want my son to learn from me?" At first, I wrote simple things. That kindness is strength. That silence isn't always peace. That love isn't a game you have to win. Then it got deeper. I wrote that I wanted him to see women who are allowed to be whole, not polite fragments. I wanted him to learn that boundaries aren't punishments, they're protection. That respect doesn't flow one way, and that tradition is only worth preserving if it doesn't require you to betray yourself. By the time I stopped typing, my fingers were shaking, but I felt lighter, like I'd exhaled something toxic that had been sitting in my lungs for months. That night, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched since the first trimester and started writing every evening. I wrote letters to River. I wrote unsent letters to Elias. I wrote imagined conversations with Judith, ones where I didn't shrink. I also started therapy again, a virtual counselor named Michelle. First session, she asked, "What's one thing you're not saying out loud?" I told her, "I'm afraid that if I protect myself, I'll lose everything I've worked for. Him, the idea of family, the dream." She looked at me and said, "Talia, what if protecting yourself is the dream?" That line lived with me. From there, my transformation wasn't overnight. It was slow, deliberate, but it was mine. I stopped editing myself in conversations with Elias. When he minimized Judith's actions, I didn't sugarcoat my feelings anymore. I told him, calmly but clearly, "Every time you defend her, you're telling me that my experience doesn't matter. And I won't keep disappearing just to keep things peaceful." I restructured my work schedule to prioritize rest and boundaries. I added my business title, CEO, to all my documents, including my hospital paperwork. Not for ego, for clarity. I needed the world to recognize that I wasn't someone to be managed or tiptoed around. I was someone building something real, for me and for my child. I also created a short list of people who had shown up for me without conditions. Carla, Jada, my assistant Morgan, a couple of clients who reached out just to check on me. I kept that list close, a reminder that love doesn't have to hurt or ask you to be smaller. But the most important change happened in how I spoke to myself. I stopped saying, "Maybe I'm too sensitive." I started saying, "That didn't feel right, and I trust myself." I stopped thinking, "If I just try harder, she'll like me." I started thinking, If someone can't see my value, it's not mine to prove. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It was in the choices I made daily, what I responded to, what I let go, what I allowed to shape my world. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold. Elias hadn't changed yet, not fully. And Judith, she was still in her tower, wrapped in her silence and superiority. But I knew who I was again. Not someone waiting to be accepted. Not someone begging to be loved. But a woman becoming a mother and rewriting the definition of family on her own terms. And from that place of clarity, I began preparing for the next chapter, not with fear, but with purpose. Because once you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to belong, the whole world opens up. And I wasn't asking anymore. Once I remembered who I was and what I stood for, I knew I couldn't go back to how things had been. Not emotionally, not practically, not spiritually. Something had broken, and I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to build something better. For the first time in months, I stopped reacting and started planning. Not revenge, not drama, boundaries. They sound simple until you have to enforce them with people who think they're entitled to you. I began with the hospital. I contacted my OB/GYN's office and spoke to the nurse who handled delivery preferences. I filled out the intake paperwork with precision. Only approved visitors allowed, no one to be informed of labor unless cleared by me. I listed Carla and Jada as the only people with access to my delivery room. I made it clear that Judith Wren was not to be allowed in without my consent, no matter what she claimed. I didn't tell Elias right away. I needed space to make decisions without catering to his guilt. When I finally shared the plan, he looked like I'd slapped him. "You really want to keep her out?" he asked. "I want her to be where I feel safe," I said. "If that means she's across the country, that's where she'll be." "She's his grandmother." "No," I corrected him gently. "She's your mother. She hasn't earned the right to call herself anything to our son." He went quiet. I think he was finally starting to understand that this wasn't a spat. It was a boundary formed from survival. He asked if he could still be in the room. I told him yes, but only if he was fully present. I needed a partner, not a pipeline between me and his mother. Then I made another decision. Financial autonomy. I created a separate savings account for River's needs, daycare, clothes, medical bills. Elias still wanted to contribute, but I made it clear that Judith's money wouldn't touch it. That meant no gifts from her with strings attached. No cribs or checks labeled "from the Wrens." I wanted a clean space, physically and symbolically, to raise my child without judgment disguised as generosity. When I declined a $500 crib Judith sent with a passive-aggressive note, "This one is safer than the trendy ones online," Elias accused me of being spiteful. "It's a gift," he said. "No," I replied. "It's a message. And I'm not accepting messages wrapped in ribbons anymore." My next move? I rewrote my will. Dramatic? Maybe, but necessary. I listed Carla as River's guardian in the event anything happened to me. I legally excluded anyone who hadn't shown emotional or physical presence during my pregnancy. That included Judith. I also updated my company's structure. Monroe Strategies was mine, but now it became part of my legacy. I filed the paperwork to create a trust in River's name. If anything happened to me, my business would continue supporting him, without needing approval or input from anyone in Elias's family. That was my resistance. Not screaming, not burning bridges for spectacle, just building walls where they were needed, with clear doors for those who had earned access. As the due date approached, I also began mentally detaching from Judith's shadow. I stopped checking to see if she liked our Instagram posts. I stopped asking Elias if she'd changed her mind. I stopped replaying her text message in my head like a broken song. I started listening to birth meditations. I practiced visualizing labor as a sacred space, protected by love and choice. I filled River's nursery with soft greens and earth tones, symbols of new life unshaped by bitterness. One night, Carla came over with a stack of books she used to read to me as a kid. As we put them on River's shelf, she said something that stayed with me. "You're not being cold. You're being clear." That was the truth. Strategic resistance isn't about hate. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing that inviting someone into your child's life is a privilege, not an obligation. I wasn't shutting Judith out to punish her. I was protecting the peace I'd fought hard to reclaim. And when the moment came, when the hospital lights dimmed and River made his first cry, I didn't want that space polluted by someone who saw us as a mistake. I wanted him born into love, unconditional, fierce, free. So I drew the line. And I made sure everyone knew which side they stood on. Labor came early. Not dangerously early, just enough to catch us off guard. 1 minute I was folding onesies and sipping ginger tea. The next I was doubled over on the couch, clutching a contraction that felt like the earth cracking open. Carla drove me to the hospital while Elias scrambled to pack a bag he should have packed 2 weeks ago. I didn't blame him. He was nervous, and honestly, so was I. But under the nerves was something steadier. Resolve. I had already done the emotional labor. The hard part now was physical, and I was ready. By the time we checked into the hospital, I was 6 centimeters dilated. Nurses moved quickly around me, asking questions, adjusting monitors, prepping my room. Through the fog of pain, I heard one ask, "Do you have a list of approved visitors?" I nodded. Yes, Carla Monroe and Elias Wren. Then I added slowly, Judith Wren is not allowed unless I personally approve it, even if she says she's the grandmother. The nurse scribbled it down, firm and unfazed. Got it, you're the boss. I smiled through the contraction. No, I'm the CEO. That detail, small as it was, would change everything. River arrived just after 9 a.m. the next day. He came out wide-eyed and wailing, with a head full of dark hair and the strongest little grip I'd ever felt. I was exhausted, torn open in every way, physically, emotionally, but as they laid him on my chest, the only thing I felt was peace. A deep, stunning, holy kind of peace. Until the door opened. I was still in recovery, half sitting in bed with River asleep on my chest, when a nurse entered holding a white plastic wristband. Hi, we have a visitor waiting in the hallway, she said, glancing down at her clipboard. Judith Wren. She says she's family. My entire body tensed. I looked at Elias, who was standing by the window, phone in hand. His eyes didn't meet mine. You told her I was in labor? I asked. He hesitated. I thought she deserved to know. I nodded slowly, swallowing the heat rising in my chest. I turned to the nurse. She's not on the list. The nurse blinked. We can ask her to leave if you want, but... She held up the wristband. She was given this in the lobby when she said she was here for the CEO. I stared at it, printed in bold block letters across the band. Guest of the CEO. For a second, no one spoke. I felt a laugh, sharp and bitter, rise in my throat. I let it out, soft and disbelieving. Because she had used my title. My identity, the very role she refused to recognize, to gain access to the very space she said I didn't belong in. I took a deep breath. She can come in, but only if she understands something very clearly. When Judith entered, she was perfectly composed, as always. Hair neat, blouse pressed, pearls glinting under hospital lights. Her eyes fell on River, then flicked to me. She said nothing at first. Then stiffly, He's beautiful. Thank you, I said. My voice was calm, steady. You can sit. But understand this. You're here because I allowed it. Not because of biology. Not because of your name. But because this is my room, my child, my family. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue. But then the nurse came in again and handed her the wristband. Just need you to wear this while you're in the maternity wing. Judith glanced down, reading it. Her hand trembled slightly. Guest of the CEO. I watched her struggle with the phrase, with what it represented. She slipped it on, slowly, and sat in the corner without a word. There was no screaming, no apology, no hug. Just silence, thick and electric, broken only by River's soft breathing. It wasn't the confrontation I used to imagine. No yelling, no dramatic walkouts. It was better. Because in that quiet moment, the power had shifted entirely. She was no longer the gatekeeper. No longer the voice that decided if I was family. She had entered my world, on my terms. And she wore the proof on her wrist. It's strange how triumph can arrive in silence. There was no announcement, no applause, no dramatic curtain fall. Just a quiet hospital room, sunlight drifting across the floor, and Judith Wren seated stiffly in the corner with a plastic band around her wrist that said more than words ever could. Guest of the CEO. I held River against my chest, his tiny breath rising and falling with mine. My body was sore, stitched, heavy with the aftermath of birth, but I felt powerful. Not in a grand, cinematic way. In the way that comes when you realize you are the foundation. That no one else gets to define who you are or what your family should look like. That was the victory. Judith tried to carry herself with dignity, but I could feel her discomfort radiating from across the room. Not because I had been cruel. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't thrown her words back at her, but because she'd been forced to confront the one thing she'd fought so hard to avoid. My authority. For months, she denied my place in her world. She'd shut me out of family photos, traditions, decisions. She didn't come to the baby shower. She called our pregnancy a mistake. She believed that biology, tradition, and name were enough to grant her control, while I, in her eyes, was just passing through. But the truth landed the moment she slipped that bracelet on her wrist. She was not in charge here. I was. She was a guest, in a room I had built, in a family I had nurtured, in a life I had fought for. And that title, CEO, wasn't just about business. It was symbolic. I had claimed ownership of my future, my motherhood, and my boundaries. In a space where she once made me feel small, I had stood tall. Elias sat beside me, holding River's foot between two fingers, quiet. He hadn't said much since the bracelet moment. I could tell something had shifted for him too. Maybe shame, maybe awe. He was watching everything he'd been avoiding unfold in real time. Judith cleared her throat and asked if she could hold the baby. I said, not yet. He needs skin to skin right now. I didn't say it harshly. I said it with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer asked for permission to protect herself. Judith nodded. She didn't argue. A nurse entered to check my vitals. She smiled at me, then glanced at Judith's wristband. Guest of the CEO. I like that, she said cheerfully. Haven't seen that one used in a while. I smiled. Thought it was appropriate. After a moment, Judith asked the nurse, what does it mean exactly? The nurse replied, it means you're here because she listed you under her authority. This room belongs to the patient. She calls the shots. Judith went quiet. I could almost hear her trying to compute what that meant in the world she'd constructed. A world where she'd always been the one people deferred to. Where women like me had to prove themselves worthy of being included. Now there was no proving. No performance. Just presence. Power. Truth. Later that day, Carla arrived. She walked in with fresh flowers and a bag of real food, chicken, rice, cornbread, and kissed me on the forehead without hesitation. She looked over, saw Judith, and simply nodded. Judith stood up and offered a tight smile. You must be Talia's mother. Carla smiled back, steady and kind, but her voice carried weight. I am, and I'm so proud of her. That moment, that one, felt like a coronation. Like two women standing on either side of a new life, but only one fully present in it. Carla took River into her arms with the familiarity of a woman who had carried hard things, survived, and loved anyway. She cooed to him, whispering, Look at you, little one. Look what your mama made possible. And Judith? She sat back down and watched. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because this was the victory. River was surrounded by love. Chosen love. No politics. No performative affection. Just people who showed up, fully. And in that moment I realized something simple and profound. Judith had tried to exclude me from her family, but I had created a better one. And whether she chose to be a part of it, on my terms, would be entirely up to her. But I would never chase approval again. Not with her. Not with anyone. Because the wristband may have said guest of the CEO. But my son? He was born into the heart of a leader. In the weeks following River's birth, the dust began to settle, but the love didn't. It bloomed. It expanded. It showed up not in grand gestures or performative family portraits, but in casseroles left on the porch, text messages that simply said, "You doing okay today?" and shoulders that offered space for my truth without asking me to tone it down. The people who mattered, really mattered, showed up in ways that made it impossible for me to forget my worth again. Carla moved into the guest room for a while, even though I told her she didn't have to. "I know," she said, "but I want to." She didn't hover. She didn't micromanage. She just folded laundry when I couldn't, walked River around the house during his witching hour, and reminded me, again and again, that I was doing better than I thought. "You know," she said one night, as she rocked River by the window, "when I had you, I didn't have half of what you have now. But I had heart. And so do you." My best friend Jada sent a care package from Denver filled with things I didn't know I needed. A heating pad, affirmation cards, nipple balm, and a playlist titled, "For When You Feel Like You're Losing Your Mind." She FaceTimed me during 3 a.m. feedings, and never once told me I looked tired. Just beautiful. Fierce. Powerful. Then there was Morgan, my assistant, who took the reins at Monroe Strategies, with more grace than I could have imagined. She coordinated meetings, emailed clients updates, and even sent River a onesie that said intern in training. She included a note. "You made space for other women to lead." That's what a real CEO does. Even 2 of my clients, a boutique candle company and a nonprofit I'd worked with for years, reached out, not to push deadlines or check on invoices, but just to say, "We miss you. Take your time. Your work speaks for itself." These were my people. The ones who didn't flinch at my boundaries, who didn't make my pregnancy about themselves, who didn't need a title or blood relation to show up in real, present, healing ways. And then there was Carla again, who, one afternoon, walked in with a framed photo. It was of me and River, just a few days old, taken from a quiet moment I didn't know she had captured. I was feeding him, hair a mess, eyes tired but peaceful. The frame was etched with 4 words. "Your love built this." She set it on River's dresser and kissed my forehead. "Don't let anyone tell you different." I didn't cry, not then. I just breathed deeper. For so long, I had tried to earn family. But what I had now was proof that family is built, not assigned. And mine was beautiful. Elias? Well, he was trying. Tentatively. Softly. He brought dinner some nights, changed diapers without being asked, but he was also wrestling with his own reflection, realizing the cost of silence, the weight of choosing neutrality over truth. He saw it in how River melted into my mother's arms, how our home was full of laughter and ease, something that had never existed in his family's kitchen. I caught him watching us sometimes, like he was studying a language he'd never been fluent in. One night, as I swaddled River, Elias stood in the doorway and said, "He's lucky." I looked up. "Why?" "Because he'll grow up knowing what strength looks like, without it being cold." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Judith didn't visit again right away. There were no flowers, no handwritten notes. But I didn't need them. I had everything I needed. Support that came without conditions, without performance. The kind that walks with you when you're bleeding and still says, "You're more than enough." That's the thing about chosen family. They don't show up when it's convenient. They show up when you're at your worst and stay long enough to remind you what's best. And in that community, those women, those allies, those warriors, I found the kind of love that builds legacies. River wasn't surrounded by people who shared his blood. He was surrounded by people who would fight for his joy. And that? That was more powerful than any apology I never received. It didn't happen in a courtroom, or on social media, or with some grand public takedown. The exposure came slowly, subtly, through conversations, contradictions, and the clarity that time offers when you stop trying to protect other people's reputations over your own peace. It started the first time we visited Georgia after River's birth. Elias wanted to introduce the baby to some of his extended family. I agreed reluctantly, but only under clear terms. We'd stay in a hotel, and River's schedule and needs came first. Judith could see him if she asked respectfully, and I would not tolerate passive aggression wrapped in politeness. Not anymore. He agreed. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon. It was a small gathering at Elias's cousin Kara's house. Backyard barbecue, lawn chairs, sweet tea, the whole Southern charm package. River wore a little blue onesie that said, "Hi, I'm new here," and I had my guard up so high you could see it in my posture. But Kara was warm, her husband grilled, her kids made me laugh, and for a moment it felt okay. Until I overheard Judith in the kitchen. She didn't know I was there. I had gone in to nurse River and stood just behind the half-closed door as she spoke to a circle of relatives in that careful, clipped voice of hers. "She's made everything so dramatic," Judith was saying. "I tried to be involved, but she shut me out. Changed the hospital paperwork to keep me away. Told Elias I couldn't even buy the baby a gift without permission. And that hospital bracelet? Honestly? Guest of the CEO? Who does that?" There were a few murmurs, a polite chuckle, but then Kara, bless her heart, asked the one question that changed everything. "But why would she do that if you treated her like family?" Silence. Judith stammered. "Well, she misunderstood things. She was emotional." Kara pressed calmly. "You didn't go to her baby shower, right?" "I had prior commitments." "You sent her gift back unopened. That wasn't personal." "You told Elias that the baby was a mistake." Judith's lips parted, stunned. He told you that?" "He didn't have to," Kara said. "We were all there. We saw how you acted, and now she's just protecting her peace. I don't blame her." I stepped back from the door, holding River a little tighter. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From validation. Because for the first time someone else said it out loud. Someone in Judith's circle. Someone from within her fortress. The rest of the weekend was quiet. She didn't speak to me directly, and I didn't offer a smile to soften the blow. I didn't owe her that. The illusion had cracked, the one she'd worked so hard to maintain, where she was the composed matriarch, and I was the bitter outsider. But I wasn't bitter. I was free, and people were beginning to see it. The following week, Elias told me that even Candace, his sister, had reached out to say, "I don't know why I let her make me feel small for so long. Watching you stand your ground helped me realize how much I've been holding back." It wasn't loud, but it was happening. Judith was being unmasked, not through vengeance, but through truth. Calm, consistent, unflinching truth. And her own actions did the exposing. Because eventually, when people keep choosing control over connection, silence over accountability, their stories start to collapse under the weight of their denial. The people who wanted to believe her began asking questions. The ones who watched how she treated Elias growing up started connecting dots. The ones who once stayed silent, like Kara, like Candace, began speaking up because they'd seen what it looked like when a woman refused to shrink. They'd seen me. Judith wasn't banished. She wasn't cut out or dragged publicly. That's not the kind of justice I wanted. What happened was deeper. She lost the narrative, and I reclaimed mine. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't vindictive. It was enough. Because in a world where women are often told to keep the peace, I chose to make peace with the truth instead. And the truth, shared, whispered, or spoken plainly, will always rise. By the time River was 3 months old, something in me had settled, not into resignation, but into clarity. That cold, gnawing ache I'd carried for so long, the one shaped like Judith's disapproval and Elias's passivity, had started to dissolve. Not because they changed, but because I had. There was no final, sweeping confrontation. No apology from Judith that arrived in the mail. No sudden awakening from Elias that turned him into the ideal partner. They were still themselves. But I was not. And that difference meant everything. One afternoon, I sat on the floor of River's nursery, folding laundry, while he kicked beside me, cooing at the sunlight through the window. As I paired tiny socks, I thought about everything that had brought me here, not just the hurt, but the hope. Not just the rejection, but the resilience. It hit me all at once. I was never fighting to be accepted. I was fighting to be respected. And those are two very different things. Acceptance is about being let in. Respect is about standing firm where you are. I'd spent so much of my pregnancy, and even before, trying to earn my place. Trying to be good enough, soft enough, polite enough. I'd thought if I could just prove myself worthy, Judith would open the gates and welcome me into her carefully curated family. But now I saw the flaw in that logic. People who require you to shrink before they show you love are not offering love at all. They're offering control disguised as tradition. And I wasn't raising my son to believe that was normal. I made a promise to myself that day. River will never wonder if he is worthy of love. He will never tiptoe around someone's coldness, mistaking it for strength. He will know that respect is mutual, not a prize he has to win. That promise became my compass. It changed the way I showed up, not just as a mother, but as a woman. I stopped over-explaining my boundaries. I stopped trying to translate my worth into terms others could digest more comfortably. I stopped apologizing for protecting my peace. Instead, I embraced what I now knew to be true. Family is not made of matching DNA or a shared last name. Family is built through love that doesn't flinch, boundaries that are honored, presence that is unconditional. Carla taught me that. Jada, my clients who respected maternity leave, my friends who dropped meals without asking for thank yous. They were all part of the new definition I was creating, one that had room for softness and strength to exist together. Even Elias began to shift in small, tentative ways. He started calling his mother less. He started listening more when I spoke. He started asking questions instead of assuming. He wasn't perfect, and we weren't magically fixed, but we were trying. Slowly. Honestly. He told me one night as we sat on the couch watching River sleep in the bassinet, "You've changed everything. For him, for me, even for her. And I'm just trying to catch up." I didn't respond with praise or reassurance. I just said, "Then keep going." Because love, in its healthiest form, isn't about being needed. It's about being seen. And for the first time, I was being seen on my terms. I didn't need Judith to call me family. I didn't need a public apology. What I needed, what I had built, was a life aligned with my values. Truth over performance, presence over politeness, respect over roles. That is the moral. That is the resolution. We teach people how to love us by the way we love ourselves. And once I stopped trying to win her over, once I stopped negotiating with someone who'd made it clear she didn't want to change, I reclaimed my time, my energy, my identity. So no, we didn't gather around a holiday table holding hands in forced reconciliation. We didn't braid the past into something pretty. What we did instead was move forward, on solid ground, with clear eyes, with quiet courage. And I finally understood. Being a mother isn't about proving your worth to the world. It's about building a world where your child never has to doubt their own. There's a quiet kind of power that comes after the storm, not the triumphant shouting or the dramatic turning of a page, but the steady, grounded hum of life continuing on your terms. That's what rebuilding looked like for me. Not flashy, not loud, but honest. 3 months after River was born, I returned to work. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Monroe Strategies wasn't just a business anymore. It was a symbol of everything I'd built, while others told me I couldn't. I scaled slowly, hired a second part-time assistant, took on fewer, more meaningful clients, mostly women-led brands and nonprofits, people who understood that real growth comes from purpose, not pressure. I held strategy calls with River in a wrap across my chest. I nursed him between proposals. I closed deals in pajama pants while listening to lullabies in the background. I was no longer chasing anyone's timeline, but mine. And the thing was, I thrived. Not in spite of motherhood, because of it. Because becoming a mother had sharpened me, given me a stronger filter. I no longer entertained clients who didn't respect my time. I no longer partnered with people who thought boundaries were negotiable. I protected my energy the way I protected my son, fiercely and without apology. Outside of work, life took on a slower, sweeter rhythm. Carla became more than River's grandmother. She became my anchor. She moved to a nearby apartment so she could help without hovering, and every Thursday she'd bring over a batch of banana muffins and say, "Just in case you forgot to eat breakfast." Jada flew in every couple months, and whenever she visited, it felt like pressing pause on all the noise. We'd take River to the park and laugh about how strange and beautiful it was to be women growing into the version of ourselves we once only imagined. And Elias? He was still figuring things out. He didn't move back in, but he came around more, sometimes to drop off diapers, sometimes just to watch River sleep and whisper, "He looks just like you." He apologized once, softly, unprompted, not with excuses, but with acknowledgement. "You were right," he said. "I didn't protect you. I wanted peace so badly that I let you suffer. I didn't offer absolution. I didn't say, 'It's okay.' I said, 'Thank you for saying that.' And I meant it. That's what growth looked like. Not forgiveness given out of habit, but healing that required accountability first." I also started writing again. Quietly in the early mornings while River napped. Little essays, reflections. I didn't know what they would become at first, but eventually they turned into something more. A blog called Built from Scratch. I wrote about motherhood, entrepreneurship, boundaries, grief, identity. I didn't sugarcoat things. I didn't pretend I had all the answers. I just told the truth. My truth. And somehow, it resonated. Emails started pouring in. From women who had been erased by their in-laws. From new mothers whose partners stood on the sidelines while they fought through labor and loneliness. From daughters still waiting for their mother's approval. They wrote things like, "You put words to a pain I didn't know I was allowed to name. Thank you for reminding me that my story matters, even if my family doesn't believe it." I realized then that rebuilding wasn't just about me. It was about creating a space for others to breathe easier too. And that became part of my mission. I launched a workshop series for women called Rewrite Your Role. We met virtually once a month, strangers at first and then sisters. We shared stories. We named patterns. We reclaimed language. We supported each other not because we had it all figured out, but because we were done pretending we didn't. And River? He flourished. He grew surrounded by love that didn't flinch. No performance. No forced smiles. Just a home full of music, soft blankets, baby giggles, and people who showed up. He saw his mom lead with clarity. He saw women uplift each other. He saw boundaries not as barriers, but as expressions of self-respect. That was the future I was building. No longer a life shaped by someone else's mold, but one carved out of my own resilience. A life that said, "I am not who you expected. I am something better. I am not yours to define. I define myself, and I didn't need your approval to begin. I needed my own. And now that I had it, I wasn't giving it away." It started with a card. A plain white envelope tucked into River's baby gift basket, delivered 2 weeks after his first birthday. The front of the card was simple, pastel blocks that spelled out "Happy Birthday." Inside, written in tight, familiar cursive, "To River on your first birthday. Love, Grandma Judy." That was it. No mention of me. No apologies. No explanations. Just a quiet attempt at entry. I sat at the kitchen table holding the card for a while, unsure what I felt. Not anger? Not really. More like weariness. That kind of tired you feel when someone reaches out just enough to remind you they're watching, but not enough to earn a seat at your table again. I showed the card to Carla, who read it and handed it back without comment. Then she said simply, "So, what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to tear it up, not in rage, but in clarity. In a, we've come too far for breadcrumbs kind of way. But another part of me, the part who had carried River, protected him, and promised him truth, knew that dismissing her completely didn't align with the woman I'd become either. I believed in boundaries, but I also believed in nuance. So I didn't tear it up. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. I just put the card in a drawer labeled miscellaneous, a symbolic place for things that didn't have a home in my present, but still existed in my story. A few weeks later, Elias asked if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop, one of those quiet, plant-filled spaces where even the lattes feel emotionally intelligent. He looked nervous, like he was holding something heavy. She asked if she could visit, he said. Not for long. Just to drop off a gift. No expectations. I stirred my drink, letting the silence hang. "I'm not asking you to say yes," he added. "I just told her I'd ask." I took a slow breath. Then I said, "Only if it's on my terms. She doesn't come here assuming anything. No photos. No grandma this or that unless I say it's okay. And if she tries to rewrite the past, I will end the visit." He nodded. "I understand." So we arranged it. A 30-minute visit at a neutral location, Elias's apartment. I made sure Carla was nearby in case I needed an emotional anchor afterward. I brought River, his favorite snack, and absolutely no expectations. Judith arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a small box wrapped in blue paper. She looked older. Not in the way people age, but in the way people carry the weight of their silence too long. She smiled, small, hesitant. I handed her the box myself. "You can give it to him." She knelt down awkwardly and placed it in River's lap. Inside was a wooden toy train with his name carved on it. Handmade, thoughtful. The kind of gift that said more than she was ready to say aloud. He banged it against the table and giggled. She laughed softly. "He's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. I didn't offer more. She didn't deserve it. Not yet. There was a long silence. She opened her mouth once, closed it, then tried again. "I wasn't ready," she said, her voice low. "Back then. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought I was protecting something, but I see now that I was just trying to control it." I looked at her. I didn't nod. I didn't cry. I just said, "You hurt me. Deeply. And I won't forget that. But I'm willing to watch how you move from here. Because River deserves truth, not fantasy. And I will not expose him to anything that makes him feel invisible." She nodded. That was it. No embrace. No clean slate. Just a cautious opening. A tentative bridge, held together by accountability. Not nostalgia. After she left, Elias sat beside me on the floor and said, "You handled that with more grace than I ever could have." I looked at River playing with the wooden train. Grace isn't weakness. It's just strength that's healed. We didn't suddenly become a perfect extended family. I didn't send holiday invitations. She wasn't added to our inner circle, but she was no longer pretending nothing had happened. And that, for me, was enough. For now. Reconciliation didn't mean forgetting. It meant acknowledging without erasing. It was a slow rebuild. Conditional, monitored, earned. And that's what made it real. It's strange, the way life softens around the edges once you stop trying to fit into someone else's frame. In the quiet after everything, the tension, the labor, the confrontation, the reckoning, there was peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being fixed, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. I didn't get the ending I once hoped for. There was no big family portrait with matching shirts, no teary-eyed speech from Judith about how wrong she'd been. There was no fairy tale tied up in a bow. What I got, instead, was real life. Honest, imperfect, and deeply mine. River turned 18 months a few weeks ago. He's walking now, half tumbling, half sprinting. He points at dogs, giggles at his own reflection, and calls every banana mama, which feels oddly appropriate some days. Our home isn't big, but it's full. Of music, of warmth, of late-night dance parties in the kitchen with socks sliding across the floor. It's full of the kind of love that doesn't have to prove itself. It just shows up, fully, consistently. Sometimes I think back to the version of me who cried after the baby shower, who felt like she was standing outside a window, looking into someone else's family, face pressed against the glass. I wish I could reach back and hold her hand. I'd whisper, "You're not outside. You're just on the edge of your own beginning." Because that's the lesson I'll carry with me, and the one I'll pass down to River, again and again. You don't have to earn your right to exist. You don't have to twist yourself into shapes to fit someone else's approval. You don't have to stay quiet to keep the peace. You don't have to trade your truth for their comfort. Family isn't who tolerates you. Family is who chooses you, without manipulation, without conditions, without you having to shrink. And maybe the most powerful part of this story isn't that Judith wore that bracelet, or that she sat in silence while I set boundaries, or even that Elias finally saw the truth. The most powerful part is that I changed the narrative. I stopped performing for a seat at their table and built my own. I became the kind of mother who honors herself, so my son will know what that looks like. I built a life where dignity is not up for debate, where love is not laced with obligation, where I am allowed, no, expected, to take up space. And in the end, I didn't need a full circle moment. I didn't need everything to be okay. I just needed to be free. There's a photo on my wall now. It's not professional, just one my friend Jada took during a slow Sunday afternoon. River is asleep on my chest, my hair a mess, my laptop open beside me, coffee half drunk. I'm not posing. I'm not filtered. I'm just there, present, peaceful, powerful in my own skin. And underneath that photo, I framed a small card. Not Judith's birthday note. Not the hospital ID. It's a piece of paper I printed one night, just for me. It reads, "You are the CEO of your body, of your story, of your future." Every time I look at it, I remember, I didn't need her permission to be family, because I already was, to River, to Carla, to myself. So if you're watching this and someone's told you that you don't belong, that you're not enough, not family, not worthy, I want you to hear this from someone who has been through it. You don't have to ask for a seat at their table. Build your own. Set it with truth. Fill it with people who feed your soul. And never, ever let someone's silence convince you you're invisible. You are here. You are whole. And you get to define what family means now. If this story echoes something in your own life, drop a comment below. Share your truth. Someone out there needs to know they're not the only one fighting to be seen. And remember, you're not just surviving. You're leading.